Good afternoon to you. Mark out with HurricaneTrack.com here. Time for our hurricane outlook and discussion. It is Friday, the 28th day of October. Good to have you along with me. We're going to talk about this short window for development that I think we're going to have. Things have kind of changed a little bit since the earlier part in the week when we were thinking, I know I certainly was, that the models were generally showing, especially the GFS, that we might have two more named storms by now, but that is not the case. That hasn't panned out. The background state not quite as favorable as especially the GFS was indicating. And then, all the different models that were indicating development, stuff changes over time. And now I am not as sure that we'll get development from these systems, but there still will be impacts, rain especially. So we'll talk about that and a very interesting tweet from our friend Eric Webb as we round out today's update. All right. National Hurricane Center homepage. Here we go. This is the first system south and west of Bermuda. It's a pretty well-defined low-pressure area down there, bringing some shower and thunderstorm activity, though it is fairly limited. Dry air and just the overall environment not being very conducive should limit this, and therefore the chances of development are down to 20% over the next 2 and 5 days, respectively. Here's our other system, though, in the Caribbean. Let's just move this out to the 5-day tropical outlook map, and this is up to 70%. Now, this could go on to develop over the next couple of days, hence the idea of a short window of opportunity for this to develop. But the big story, and I want to emphasize this very clearly, is the rainfall potential for parts of the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and that includes, of course, the DR and Haiti, and maybe even eventually Jamaica and parts of Cuba. But over the weekend, yes, parts of the greater Antilles could see some very heavy rainfall, and rain is an impact. It can be a very severe impact for certain areas. Your area can maybe handle 2 or 3 inches of rain, or 6 to 8 inches of rain, maybe. But some of these areas, when you get that much rain, especially on these higher terrain regions, especially Haiti, you can really have a lot of problems. So I want to make sure that is emphasized, even though it's only an invest area 95L, it already has impacts coming with it, and we just need to keep that in mind, all right? And you can see that here on the satellite animation. It's a large, broad area of low pressure, but underneath those clouds, yes, there are periods of heavy rain, and if that slides up over your area, remember earlier in the week, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico both got hammered with some pretty decent flooding, and that could make its way again over towards Hispaniola here, and that vicinity over the next couple of days or so. Meanwhile, there's the smaller low-pressure area just west of Bermuda, west and southwest. We'll have to ask Howard, our friend over there, is it raining? It looks like one of those bands just went right over Bermuda recently, but pretty much non-tropical in nature overall, kind of has a front associated with it. And remember, it looks like that. See, they both have that sort of similar look, like a mid-latitude storm instead of all by itself and concentrated. That would make it more of a typical tropical cyclone. Nevertheless, whatever we call it, it is bringing some rainfall to parts of Bermuda, some squally conditions from time to time, and that's going to hang out for about the next day or so until the system eventually lifts out. It shows up pretty nicely here on the vorticity signature, as does our system down here in the Caribbean. That's getting a little bit more concentrated. This is still pretty linear overall with a little notch on it, so to speak. A telltale sign that it's not quite organizing too quickly just yet, but it's there, and as I mentioned already, bringing perhaps some rain, maybe heavy at times, to portions of Bermuda. All right, so the GFS, which again earlier in the week, I remember it was developing this into a hurricane and it brought it over towards Central America. Well, not so much. I guess it changed its mind, so to speak. Which is interesting because there's a pretty good area of high pressure down here in the upper levels. I can show you that real quick here. Yes, there is this trough dug in, and it is imparting some shear, but it's not the worst. We're not seeing greens and yellows where it's just destructive. There's a little bit of shear down here, and there's some dry air, but it's not the worst environment, but apparently it is also neither the best environment as well. So let's move this out into time, see what happens. This is 24, 48 hours, if it'll let me. There we go. 48 hours out. This does try to develop a little bit more, just to the south of the Dominican Republic by Sunday morning. And then meanwhile, again, speaking of Bermuda, there's that system up there kind of getting elongated, part of that overall piece of energy sitting out there. This will eventually go on to develop into a larger ocean storm, as I'll show you as we move forward. And we'll do that now. So here's 72 hours. There it is. It starts to evolve into a much larger ocean storm. Maybe still some influence for Bermuda even by Monday morning, but not much. And then here's this system tangled up with the greater Antilles. And you have to remember, please do keep this in mind. You see these colors here, these oranges and yellows. Well, that's energy. That's vorticity in the atmosphere. And I know enough that when I see that, look, you don't need to have it all bundled up into a nice dark ball like we've seen with a major hurricane, like Ian or Carl or Julia or anything else we've seen this year. Even that down there was just kind of amorphous and just, loosely defined. It doesn't matter in terms of the rainfall. You can still get a lot of heavy rain, and you see that sort of extending over Haiti and elsewhere, even Jamaica maybe by Halloween there on Monday. That could be problematic, so we do need to keep an eye on this, and people down there need to keep aware of changing conditions with flash flooding, mudslides, and all sorts of calamities related to that. And it just kind of hangs out there. That's what bothers me. Could be pretty problematic for our friends down there. And even through day 5, it sort of dissipates. Quite a big difference from the hurricane the GFS was indicating earlier in the week. Now basically nothing in terms of, well, comparing it to a hurricane, yes, but still, rain is not nothing. I have to be careful myself to make sure we don't lose track of, what's important. And even though there's not a hurricane indicated, there still could be some impacts. Meanwhile, just going on out here, finishing this up to day 7, it kind of dissipates into Central America, and then you got a nice big area of high pressure over the southeast. That'd be a nice way to start November. Does the Euro agree? Hey, that'd be the perfect name for a great game show, so to speak. Does the Euro agree? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. This is the Euro from the same time frame, the 12Z today, going out 24 hours. It's a little bit more concentrated by tomorrow morning than the GFS is. Also a little bit more energy associated with 95L than the GFS shows. I don't know. It's been just a weird year where the model's just not trying to agree to much, it seems. The GFS is either too aggressive. The Euro seems to be playing catch-up. So we just watch and try to adjust accordingly, I guess, as we move along. Speaking of moving along, let's go to 48 hours, 72. They both agree generally that this will become a large ocean storm, so that's there. The Euro a little bit more aggressive, though, and concentrating 95L southeast of Jamaica by Monday morning, so we'll see if that actually happens. And then finally, by days 4 and 5, it too, the Euro, has it headed towards Central America, and finally by days 6 and 7, kind of buries it in Central America, as we saw the GFS do. And then here we've got strong high pressure as well, but it's more kind of ridging in from the northwest Atlantic instead of closing it off over the southeast like we can see here. Let's just look. See a little bit of a difference there between the Euro and the GFS in terms of how it does so, kind of reaching the same conclusion that, yes, strong high pressure over the eastern U.S. to start November. Here's something interesting regarding starting November. Skipped ahead a little bit there. Here's this tweet. Very interesting. Eric says this is about as big of a signal as you're ever going to see this far out for a tropical cyclone in the Atlantic Basin in November. He says you can thank the big cold surge in South America. What? Yes, we had that earlier this year. That cold, dense air that comes down, well, not down, it goes north from South America. I know it's counterintuitive, right? Pushes along, coming up from the south here, out into the Caribbean. That cold, dense air creates convergence. The air piles up. You get that relative vorticity out there, the energy. Just the air piling up is enough. And that process, convergence as we call it, leads to upward motion in the atmosphere. That cold, dense air getting out over, and believe me, you're not going to go down to the Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, or Trinidad and Tobago and be like, whew, it's cold out here. It's relative to the averages. Colder, denser air pushes off, and that helps to create convergence. And then the rest of the graphics in Eric's panel here shows this. Favorable upper level winds out to the time frame. Well, this is down at the lower part of the atmosphere. Westerly winds down here, so a good overall area of convergence, basically. But then the upper levels, I know I've got that in here somewhere. Well, there it is. We'll just click on that. That's it. That upward motion, that green there, wow. The 200 millibar velocity all the way out to November the 10th. As he said, that's about as favorable a look as you're going to see for early November to possibly get a tropical cyclone to develop in the Atlantic in the month of November. So while we might not have much developing from these systems now, maybe not our named storms yet, maybe November stays active as well, and we keep chipping away at getting closer to a normal season. Because remember, just to refresh your memory, the season was forecast by pretty much everybody. The major agencies, universities, long-time excellent forecasters in their fields, we all got gypped, so to speak. We got rickrolled, as a good way to put it, from a lot of the climate models this season, that it was going to be a hyperactive season, and we are actually just about that much below the long-term average. Believe it or not, as bad as Ian was, as bad as Fiona was, hey, it just shows in your respective areas it only takes one, no matter what the season is forecast to be. But nevertheless, the season was forecast to be very, very active. We're ending up right slightly below average. So if we do get a couple of other additional named storms and maybe a hurricane or two that can stay out over open water, hard to do when you're in the Caribbean, right? It might just bump those numbers up and we at least get to average. Not that anyone's necessarily rooting for that. I don't want you to mistake me for rooting for hurricanes here, but the pattern could deliver that and at least get us closer to that average for the season in an otherwise very weird year where things just didn't happen the way that a lot of forecasters were expecting, myself included. Not really forecasts, I just show you what we're looking at. You know by now. But yes, it's been a weird year for sure. All right, let me get this online for you, and I wish you all a happy weekend ahead. Whatever you're going to be doing, be safe out there. A good weekend ahead. I just need to finish this up. I'm starting to run out of things to say and how to say them. So, yes, we'll watch what's happening with our two systems. I will be back throughout the weekend to update you on those developments, if any, and we will take it from there. All right, again, I am Mark Suddeth for Hurricane Track. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. I do appreciate it. I'll be back with you throughout the weekend.